ao segundo simpósio.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to the second Symposium of Religious Freedom of the Birmingham University for the Centers of Study in Law and Religion, Federal University of Uberlândia. We are very happy. We are very happy with your presence here. This will be a historical moment for Brazil to have this international event and such an important theme. I want to call to the table on this first plenary Professor Gary Doxey, Associate Director, Law Professor, and the International Center Study of Religion of the Brigham University. Also Professor Rodrigo Vitorino Souza Alves. He's a researcher, leader in CEDIRE, law professor in the Uberlândia University. Also to the table, Ms. Sueli Vieira, Subsecretary of Human Rights and Racial Equality of the Federal District, and she's representing Mrs. Marcela Passamani, the Secretary of Justice of Brasileiro Federal District.
Professor Gary Doxey.
Aqui temos pensadores de diversos setores, universidades, governos, justiça, imprensa, religiões e grupos sociais. Cada convidado do simpósio, cada de vocês, é uma pessoa que possui extensa experiência e interesse.
We have been talking about religious freedom, and you have been invited because of your capacity with the theme.
Em contribuir com o tema.
We hope in your capacity to exchange ideas and to fulfill the activities. We're very grateful for your participation.
Ideias e fortalecer.
I want to highlight the symposium theme to build bridges, break barriers, the role and contribute to the role of religious freedom for a fair society. This theme was inspired by the Brazilian Constitution that declares on its third article that one of the objectives of the Federation of Brazil is to build a free society that is fair with solidarity. And this is the objective of Brazil for all nations. But when reflecting on the tragedies, the violence, and the injustices happening in the current world more frequently, the goal is to establish a fair, free society, and this is very urgent. The hate and anger and judgment, defamation are almost universal in these times of polarization. And the incivility phenomenon is reaching the commerce, the homes, private lives, and it's paralyzing the process of public policies. It is stopping solutions for the urgent programs that we have. Also has causing trouble to the well-being of individuals and has been causing anguish and pain. What to do? How can we fight this? How can we build bridges and break walls? It is important to acknowledge that disagreeing is not something bad, and diversity of opinions is the ingredient, and it's essential for democracy. We want to learn how to disagree. We have to learn how to disagree better, to being able to disagree, to listen to one another, respect each other, despite the deeply divergent opinions people hold. Through the painful path of the cruel conflicts of the past centuries, a mechanism that has been developed that supports and preserves solidarity and peaceful coexistence. And this mechanism is religious freedom. Religious freedom makes a society which is full of diversity possible. In this symposium, we will study religious freedom with the desire to understand and defend it better. It is, of course, the patrimony of all humanity, believers and non-believers, and it's fundamental for the success of a free and fair society. Thank you.
Crentes é fundamental para o sucesso de uma sociedade livre, justa e solidária. Muito obrigado.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great satisfaction to participate in an event like that is very rich. And it's rich because of the people who are here. We are mediators, facilitators, and there's a space of dialogue build and knowledge exchange, collaborations, partnerships, many things that are arising from spaces like that. I'm here representing the Center
Do Centro Brasileiro de Estudos em Direito e Religião.
in Law and Religions, CEDIRE. It is a group from the Uberlândia University. And we have this privilege of collaborating with the Center of Studies in Law and Religions of the BYU University in the United States. We're performing symposiums like this. We have been talking. It's been 30 years that we have been talking and trying to spread knowledge and awareness about religious freedom. This is the second symposium in Brazil and the first one that some of you participated. For some of you, it's the first time in the symposium. And it was a beautiful beginning for this initiative, this collaborative initiative. And we have now in our event and throughout those 3 days, people who are acting in different areas with different trajectories, and this will enrich the event very much. We have people from the academy, people who work in the justice system as attorneys or judges or other areas. We have religious leaderships. We will start the day with a panel, an academic panel, and a religious panel. And this is a fundamental theme, how to enable this pacific living, how to build bridges, how to break walls, and how religious freedom can contribute for this fair society and cooperative society. So I represent CEDIRE. I will unite to my colleague, Gary. Our institutions are very satisfied to have you all here. We hope those are days of growth, of going deeper in the knowledge of this theme, and also days of interaction and collaboration with the construction of this free society. This is an event that will arise from research, actions that will happen in the university, but it only makes sense if we take that into a broader space with debate and review of the same knowledge. We'll have the opportunity throughout those 3 days to discuss the theme of religious freedom when building a free and fair society from different looks. From the looks of the religious communities, as we're going to see, of the international community, specific areas as faith and companies and compliance, contemporary challenges perspectives of law on faith and human development, perspectives of the religious communities about human development. We're going to have a workshop about relationships and work. We have sustainability and inclusion, relationships and religious freedom in the justice system, and many other subjects that will be dealt in all of the sessions. And we will finish on the final day on constructing public policies and building approaches on personal relationships with religious freedom. This is an event with several topics, and for sure there will be space for dialogue. Many times, due to the format of the lectures, especially in the plenary, we do not have questions and answers, but we expect that during coffee break moments, you can all interact on the themes that will be approached and also on the panels of parallel sessions. We hope to have a dialogue among all participants. So we want to wish you all a great event and a good afternoon, and I would like to thank our participants. Good afternoon, everyone. Representing Governor Ibanez Rocha and our Secretary Marcela Passamani, we would like to thank and we would like to say it's a great honor to have been invited. The governor and the secretary had an urgent matter to solve and they could not come personally. But Dr. Rodrigo, Gary, we want to thank you very much for this opportunity of dialoguing, build, reflect through our perspectives and the actions implemented by each and every one of us. I would like to thank each researcher, a person in the academy that have been contributed to build these objectives and promote policies to ensure human rights. I want to thank Elianildo Nascimento, most of you might know. He is working with us, building the religious freedom policies for the federal district. Managers, people who are here, this is an opportunity to discuss, because if you are doing politics and you're not thinking of religion and the equality and the right of faith, we are violating rights. This is an opportunity for us to think on how to work on this process of strengthening our spaces, discussing these policies in our communities, our political spaces that are being constituted. And this, unfortunately, has been hurt due to previous political policies. This is a memorable event.
Para que possamos garantir a efetividade do atendimento humanizado dessas vítimas aí que vêm aí ao longo de muitos anos, passando aí por diversos tipos de violação e muitas vezes sendo revitimizada nos espaços que deveria acolher, né? Acho que esse é um espaço, é a hora da gente dialogar, de centrar força e da gente conseguir consolidar uma política efetiva. Então, agradeço aí a oportunidade de estar aqui, agradeço a oportunidade de estar dialogando e nos colocamos à disposição.
Nesse momento, iremos desfazer essa mesa. Agradecemos a presença e solicito que o professor Gary Doxey e o professor Rodrigo continuem na mesa. Nesse momento, convido para compor a mesa o professor W. Cole Durham, Jr. Por favor. Nós teremos agora a palestra de abertura do evento o papel do direito à liberdade religiosa na construção de uma sociedade livre, justa e solidária. O nosso palestrante, professor Durham Jr., é diretor fundador do Centro Internacional de Estudos de Direito e Religião da Universidade Brigham, da Faculdade de Direito. Ele é ex-presidente do Consórcio Internacional de Estudos sobre Direito e Religião, foi professor de Direito da Reuben Law School. Ele é graduado pela Harvard College e pela Harvard Law School, onde foi editor de notas da Harvard Law Review e editor-chefe do Harvard International Law Journal. Ele é editor-chefe e fundador do Oxford Journal of Law and Religion. Então, agora teremos a alegria de ouvir o professor Durham. Professor.
Well, I first apologize that I cannot. I first apologize that I can't speak Portuguese. Nonetheless, I'm very grateful to be here, and I'm grateful for the translators who are doing a very good job. It's a particular honor to launch our discussions in the second Brazilian Symposium on religious freedom. I've had several opportunities over the years to visit Brazil, and I've been constantly impressed by the strong commitment of Brazil's people and its government to the highest standards of freedom of religion or belief. As in all societies, there are recurring problems and imperfections in enforcement. But in general, it is fair to say that Brazil is a country with a particularly strong record when it comes to religious freedom. I believe one of the implications of this reality is that Brazilians will increasingly have opportunities and responsibilities to share this heritage of freedom, not only with their fellow citizens, but with others around the world. Among other things, I'm very conscious that in just a few months, Brazil will assume the presidency of the G20 summit process. This will open unique opportunities to share how Brazil's commitment to freedom of religion or belief has had not only intrinsic value for the country, but has also contributed to strengthened achievements in other areas. I believe that Brazil has the capacity to exemplify what I will be talking about today, how religious freedom rights contribute to building a free, just, and mutually supportive society. This is not to say that Brazil has an easy task. We live in a time of grave religious freedom challenges. I could spend my entire time and more detailing the problems, but let me just mention a few of the more significant concerns. While we join with others who respond to the tragedy of genocide with the solemn exclamation, "Never again," we are all too conscious that the reality seems to be again and again. According to the Pew Forum for Research, social hostilities related to religion declined slightly in 2019 after many years, with 22% of the countries, 43 altogether, including many of the world's largest countries, having high or very high levels of social hostility. There's also been some slight progress in countries experiencing religion-related terrorism, but one can't take too much comfort from the fact that there's still 49 countries that have suffered some terrorist activity, including violence that caused more than 50 injuries per country in 28 of the countries in 2019. Government restrictions on religion rose to an all-time high, with 29% of countries having high or very high levels of government restrictions. In 82% of the countries, government authorities interfered in worship in ways such as prohibiting certain practices, withholding access to places of worship, or denying permits for religious activities or buildings. COVID-19 had a number of deleterious effects on religious practice. Some government restrictions were justified by the health risks involved, but there was a tendency for restrictions to be unduly harsh, especially when compared with other types of behavior where groups were allowed to gather with lesser constraints. Religious groups filed lawsuits or otherwise contested COVID-19 restrictions in 54 of 198 countries. They also defied public health rules related to COVID in 35% of the countries studied. As a counterweight, it is important to note that the religious leaders and groups promoted public health measures to help slow the spread of the disease in many contexts. But litigation challenging disproportionate regulation has occupied the courts in both the United States and Europe and in other parts of the world. Religious leaders around the world are concerned by the rising tide of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. Similar persecution has been documented against religiously unaffiliated people in a number of countries. Level of vandalism attacks on religious properties, as well as physical attacks on individuals, are proliferating. Even in Brazil, we see these problems. Despite a strong positive record, Brazil is clearly not exempt from these problems. While a brief perusal of the U.S. State Department's annual religion report on Brazil identifies many of the positive measures that government leaders and others are taking to promote and protect freedom of religion, the report in Brazil also points to varying types of recurring problems. For example, women continued to face difficulties in being allowed to wear Islamic head coverings, such as the hijab, when going through security in airports and in public buildings. Also problematic are various reports concerning attacks on or discrimination against Afro-Brazilian religions. To its credit, Brazil appears to be taking these seriously, and the disproportionate number of cases involving followers of Afro-Brazilian religions will probably are clearly being addressed. Now, thus far, I've just been describing the tip of the iceberg of the problems of recurring religious freedom challenges that we face around the world. What I would like to do in the remainder of my time, however, is not to focus on the immensity and intensity of the challenges posed by religious freedom issues, but to examine instead why the principle of religious freedom is such a vital solution. I often point out that religious freedom is the oldest of the internationally recognized human rights, tracing its history back at least to the Peace of Augsburg in 1555 and the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. I call it the grandparent of human rights because other rights such as freedom of expression, freedom of association, equality, and non-discrimination rights were all worked out first in the context of deep religious tensions. Often in our day, I have to lament that it is not only the grandparent of human rights, but an unfortunately neglected grandparent as well. But if one penetrates beneath the surface of the shifting faces of social conflict that have unfolded over centuries, it is much more than a progenitor of other rights. Religious freedom is modernity's master key to solving the riddle of how to achieve stable peace in a world of deep differences. My aim in what follows is to argue that freedom of religion or belief provides the fundamental underlying social and political architecture that is vital for achieving what the title of our program describes as free, just, and sustainable, mutually supportive societies. The argument in brief is that the ideal of human dignity, which includes freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, is critical to stabilizing just social orders, and as such is critical to just peace at all levels, global, national, local, family, and individual. Parenthetically, it's worth noting that this argument is clearly not intended as a species of neocolonialism coming from a North American, Rather, it's intended to impose, nor is it intended to impose an outside point of view. Rather, it's intended to invite those in Brazil and around the world into the world in which we live together, with differences, with ability to learn from each other, and thereby to come to a better understanding of the ways that the dignity of difference and the dignity of understanding can be brought together. In many ways, the brief statement of my argument is simply a statement of time-tested axioms of modern pluralist societies. But these axioms are paradoxical in key respects. They entail requiring members of society to respect the right of others to hold beliefs that may be deeply different from their own. This in turn means that social structures cannot be based on specific sets of commonly held values, except the reciprocally recognized right for different groups and individuals, subject only to strictly limited restrictions, to choose and act on their own values. For this reason, the canons of freedom of religion or belief often seem counterintuitive at the level of ordinary politics, where differing values are often at the heart of conflicts. During much of human history, religion has been viewed as a major source of social tensions and divisiveness. Because religious differences are deep and non-negotiable, they lead to intractable conflicts that have littered the pages of history. While there is some truth to this account, recent scholarship suggests that this picture overstates the dark side of religion. Close analysis of conflicts that involve religious actors often demonstrate that it is not religion itself that causes conflicts, but a variety of other factors. Violence in the name of religion may reflect the instrumentalization of religion by other social actors. This is not to claim that religion is never responsible for violence and conflict. It is simply a reminder that great care should be taken in attributing blame. With that caveat in mind, the starting point for excavating the minimum conditions for social peace is an insight associated with the thought of the philosopher John Locke, where much of prior political theory had assumed that social stability presupposed religious homogeneity. Locke recognized that it is not so much religious differences that causes conflict, but pressures to coerce religious homogeneity. Stated differently, Locke recognized that the real source of violence perpetrated in the name of religion is not religious differences themselves, but defensive conduct when conscientious convictions are threatened by efforts to coerce social monism. This fundamental Lockean insight was revolutionary at its time when first pronounced, and remained experimental when first introduced as a principle of social order in American constitutionalism. The insight has been refined in various ways through subsequent experience. First, we have now much better empirical evidence that religious freedom is strongly correlated with and likely to be causally contributory to the achievement of countless other social goods. We have a better understanding of the way that religion generates social capital, and that social capital can be turned to positive ends if it doesn't have to be spent defending the religious community against outside attacks or persecution. Second, experience has shown that a far more robust version of pluralism is workable and stable than what Locke originally proposed. In his view, the private judgment of a person, quote, does not take away the obligation of that law, nor deserve a dispensation or exception, unquote. This issue, whether neutral and general laws should override the claims of conscience, remains one of the central controversies of modern constitutional theory. While debate continues, legal regimes sensitive to the problem have recognized that both the intrinsic justice and the stability strengthening potential of religious freedom are enhanced if the law is construed to avoid conscientious conflict, except where there is a compelling need that cannot be achieved in a less restrictive way. I need to just point out that within the last 2 years, our Supreme Court has backpedaled the notion that neutral and general laws alone suffice to override religious freedom, and they've basically undercut that notion. Third point, Locke was right that there are limits to what needs to be tolerated in a free society. But most would disagree with Locke and his judgment that Catholics, Muslims, atheists, and perhaps Jews were too intolerant to be tolerated, or stated differently, that only Protestants could survive. Our notion is that this line needs to be drawn in a much more limited way, and it suffices if we exclude only those who would exploit democracy to abolish it. There is substantial room in stable societies for people with deeply different worldviews. A fourth point we have learned is that we would not necessarily draw the line between religious and secular in a way that would confine religion wholly to the private sphere. What is critical is an inclusive and flexible form of secularity that confers no distinctive coercive power on either religious or secular worldviews, but rather affords inclusive recognition of the dignity of all. The minimum conditions necessary for a stable peace can thus be much more narrowly defined than what was first intimated by Locke's thought. It is not cultural homogeneity that is critical, and not even tolerance as Locke understood it, but a much narrower pluralistic commitment that can be articulated as follows. What counts is not whether religious people appreciate other beliefs and practices or whether they admit of alternative paths to salvation. What really matters is whether each, on sound internal grounds, supports the public doctrine of the equal inherent dignity and inalienable freedom of all human beings, irrespective of their religion, life stance, or any other differences, and that each reasonably understands or else trusts that others similarly support general freedom of religion or belief. Note that in the end, what's really required for social peace at the core of Lockean insights is, as adapted and refined over ensuing centuries, is a shared commitment to equal human dignity, safeguarded by strong protection of freedom of religion or belief. This commitment needs to be sufficiently robust that it can give rise to trust that human dignity, as variously understood by those holding differing worldviews and life stances, will be protected. The ideal of dignity, as envisioned here, needs to be understood more dynamically than as a mere starting point for moral deductions. The idea of dignity has a generative power in discourse that has the potential to expand and raise sights. It has an inherent reciprocity that encourages those on one side of a moral argument to take the dignity of others into account. Moreover, it is a discursive concept with an upward trajectory. It typically serves as a basis for generating agreement and building common understanding, building consensus on a higher plane than might have been reached without appeal to dignity. In my final section, I want to emphasize one aspect of the notion of religious freedom that is not always sufficiently appreciated. The doctrine I have in mind is the idea that perhaps is best described as the autonomy of religious communities, or religious autonomy for short. By this, what is meant is not the autonomy of individuals, but the right of religious communities to self-determination in their internal affairs, or perhaps more accurately, since not all of these matters are purely internal, it is better to speak of the right of religious communities to autonomy in their own affairs. It's true that, as David Novak has said, Freedom of religion in our democratic pluralistic polities is not what in pre-modern times was called libertas ecclesias, or the liberty of the church. While there are no doubt risks that the freedom of the religious believer may be limited by the liberty of the church, the liberty of the religious community as a whole and of other believers would be limited if subjected to the beliefs and will of any particular individual in the community. The beliefs of the individual in profound ways are derivative from the beliefs of the group. The individual is free to leave the group and to attempt to persuade the group, but not to dictate the beliefs or policies of the group. Now, this is not the place to go into a full-scale analysis of the autonomy of religious communities. Suffice it to say that there is a notion deeply embedded in the jurisprudence of the West and other countries as well, that there is a dimension of religious authority that lies beyond the jurisdiction of the secular state. In the parlance of a famous saying from Jesus, "Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." That is to say, the dimension of religious authority lies beyond the jurisdiction of the secular ruler. Secular courts for centuries have understood the wisdom of not intervening in the autonomy of religious communities. There's a long line of cases in the United States, tracing back to a time before the first free exercise case law began, that has elaborated the doctrine of religious autonomy. Similar jurisprudence can be traced in European countries and in the European Court of Human Rights. Both the religion clauses of the U.S. Constitution bar interference with the right of religious communities to autonomy, among other things, in making employment decisions with respect to their personnel who have ministerial roles. The case law of the European Court of Human Rights has also been protective of religious autonomy in employment contexts. Because of significant variance in the organizational structures that religious communities build, the implications of religious autonomy doctrine can have rather different outcomes in different religious systems. But failure to respect such autonomy can be profoundly disruptive to the life of religious communities, and inevitably has trickle-down implications for the religious lives of individual believers. I emphasize the significance of religious autonomy doctrine as a core dimension of freedom of religion or belief because it is a domain that has witnessed some of the most significant religious freedom developments in recent years. An example is the recent Alves versus Chile case decided by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights in February 2022. In that case, brought by a woman who lost certification by the Catholic Church to serve as a teacher of Catholic religion in Chilean public schools as a result of coming out as a lesbian, the Inter-American Court ultimately found in favor of the teacher, even though in fact she continued in her employment, albeit in a different and actually better paying position in the same school. Significantly, in reaching the decision, however, the court noted the significance of taking autonomy notions into account. A largely parallel case in the European Court of Human Rights involved a priest who ultimately lost his certification and his actual job in Spain because he had chosen marriage over his vows of celibacy. These two decisions are obviously more complex than I can describe here, but they arise in a particularly contentious area of modern culture wars where some of today's most profound examples of deep differences are to be found. They arise in areas where some of the most wrenching decisions must be made as we consider conflicting claims of human dignity. On their face, these issues appear to pose a conflict between religious freedom and discrimination claims. But remembering the religious autonomy issue helps to clarify that dignity claims are at stake on both sides of these disputes. It's easy to see the discrimination involved when an individual loses employment altogether or a specific kind of employment as in Alves. However, it's easy to forget that a decision to protect individuals from this type of employment discrimination results in another form of discrimination against a religious community's beliefs and way of life, and against the associated rights of its believers. To be ultimately effective and to find ways in which individuals and groups with deep differences can live together in peace and stability, the dignity claims of both of those with sexual orientation claims and of those with religious claims, including religious autonomy claims, must be taken into account and carefully balanced. Historical experience has long suggested that religion has its roots in its own distinctive ontological space. While the exact boundaries of this space have been contested through the centuries and remain contested today, the existence of this space and the importance of protecting it has become one of the fundamental verities of our constitutional experience. Protecting the autonomy of religious communities respects the dignity of those who have formed them and choose to live within them. At the same time, it safeguards the space within which religious communities work, grow, and resolve internal issues. It also maintains the potential for those who dissent to build alternative communities or simply to go their own way. History has taught that, like freedom of religion more generally, and despite perhaps precisely because of tensions, religious autonomy is one of the most effective tools we have for channeling the influence of conscience in fruitful paths. It is not without limits, but those limits need to be structured in ways that facilitate rather than control its contributions. Thank you.
Agradecemos ao professor Durham por sua brilhante palestra. Nesse momento, desfazemos a mesa e convidamos o professor Doxey e o professor Rodrigo a continuar na mesa. Passaremos agora
Let's
ao
invite Mr. Rodrigo to continue at the table, and now we're going to move to the plenary panel number 1, the role of religious communities in building a free, fair, and solidary society.
convido para compor a mesa os palestrantes.
I'd like to compose the table, the lectures in this panel. First of all, Elder Ulisses Soares, Quorum of the 12 Apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Convido a mesa
I'd like to invite Christine Alves Bastos, Mametu Zazi Luasi.
Cavalcante, membro do
A member of the Office of External Affairs of the Baja Community of Brazil. Finally, I'd like to invite Bishop Ricardo Hopers, Bishop and General Secretary of the National Conference of Bishops of Brazil. Right now, I'd like to make a quick introduction of the speakers in this panel. Elder Ulisses Soares was appointed as a member of the 12 Apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints on March 31st, 2018. He was a member of the General Secretary. He was a counselor in Africa Southeast, president of Brazil, and also Brazil South. Christine Alves Bastos, she's from the African religion in Brasilia, and she has the role of Mamito Zazieli Wasi. She's a leadership of Abassa of Yansan. Luisa Cavalcante is a member of the Office of External Affairs of the Baha'i Community of Brazil, and she dedicates herself in developing relationships with members and government members, as well as individuals working in civil society with topics related to social progress. Bishop Ricardo Hopers, General Secretary of the National Conference of Bishops of Brazil. He is a bishop of the municipality of Rio Grande, director and professor of the Institute, the Catholic Institute of Pelotas. So these are the members of our panel. Let's start the lectures with Lisa Soares, Mameto Zazi, Luisa Cavalcante, and Bishop Hoppers. Thank you. Dear friends, and the ones that are in this fight for religious freedom, I'm blessed to be talking to you here today. I'd like to present my greetings for you sharing your voice here in the symposium. Academic, diplomatic, and interreligion activity, interfaith activities like you do are a work of love for faith, dialogue, and human prosperity. The solidarity we feel here is also extended towards our society. Paulo Coelho, Brazilian writer, echoes this purpose. We are the ones who feed the soul of the world, and the world we live in is going to be better or worse according we become better or worse individuals. And that's where the power of love comes in. When we love, we always strive to be better than we actually are. Shall continue together in spreading this goodwill with different beliefs. We see more and more the faces of life. To be in a successful society, we need to employ our best efforts. In this journey, liberty requires sacrifices, peace demands war, and love requires discipline. It is a great joy to be here in my hometown. Brazil is blessed by amazing landscape, huge rainforests filled with life, countless water streams and green areas, also coasts, abundant species of fauna and flora. Each tree, stream, insect contributes towards balance. God created different ecosystems that bless and enrich human life. However, we need to do our share in preserving the wonders of creation. God created different ecosystems that bless and enrich human life, but it is our role to be a part of preserving the wonders of creation. Just like these interdependent organisms, society lives and breathes amidst a diversity of opinions, experiences, and beliefs. We need one another in different ways to listen, to speak. Just like the biological ecosystem is fragile and susceptible to individuals, the social ecosystem disintegrates if we do not have balanced actions. The way we use our freedom and maintain our responsibilities determines the health of the earth and the health of society. Individuals cannot be led away from the differences of society, just like the elements cannot uh, prevent interaction of nature. Our evergreen task is not only living together, but living well together. Everyone is born with a sense of justice. This instinct, granted by God, helps us sail in midst of cruelty, oppression, and inequality of life. The movements that bring change to the world do not come out of nowhere. Under activism, we have a support of traditions, practices, and beliefs that shape our moral horizons. This support is given to institutions and ideas that give oxygen to justice. Churches gather people to discuss matters that are eternal. Civic rituals, spiritual ones, provide meaning to being born, married, to the death and sacrifice. Families provide children their first love and cooperation lessons. Students and teachers can see a better future. Stories of surpassing suffering bring us a memory of common aspirations. Each generation must decide which traditions to uphold and which traditions to change. Only within a community, transformation of justice can grow roots. Martin Luther King Jr., a leader of civil rights in the United States during the 20th century, taught us that justice comes from collectiveness, not only from a single individual. He called it a loved community because people feeling included towards each other, practicing the cycle of love, responsibility, empathy, and sacrifice. Suffering, brothers and sisters, touches upon all of us. And at a given point, each one of us goes through losses, failures, deceptions, despair. The pain of the world makes us think if, when, and if God is going to hear us call. Justice is finally a matter of faith. We can only believe and hope that creation is going to reward good instead of evil. It's going to have right over wrong, ensuring rules are just. God hopes us that we answer this call of justice in harmony. And this involves the beautiful reality of people. Behind each protest, there is a support of a mother, a promise to a father, a commitment to a friend, the memory of our loved ones who have gone, civical duty towards invisible community of religion. Not everything is about liberation. Is a sacrifice in ourselves to live together in our differences. We need
Somos como filhos e filhas de Deus. O que aconteceria se todos fizessem o que quisessem e nunca pensassem nos outros? Como seria um mundo em que prevalecem as escolhas individuais? Como uma cidade voltada apenas a seus próprios interesses sobreviveria? Entre as muitas formas de organização humana, a religião nos dá um senso de responsabilidade uns para com os outros. Enquadra nossas lutas dentro de uma história de redenção.
their same, not as objects. Religion provides us with moral reservoir that everyone can use. Even though religion does not have the monopoly of morality, it provides incomparable evidence for us to be the best we can be. Faith challenges trends. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs said that religions work as a voice against the siren call of a culture that seems to value itself over all others, putting rights over responsibilities, receiving
Colocar os direitos acima das responsabilidades, receber mais do que dar, consumir mais do que contribuir e buscar sucesso mais do que servir aos outros. Viver no mundo moderno,
striving for success more than being constantly distracted. But because we belong to this tradition, it helps us thinking about contributions of past generations and inspires our hearts to live according to its own memories. At the end, justice has more to do with people than ideas. And as human beings, we are naturally inserted in relationships from the moment we are born to the moment we die. When we leave ourselves to lonely, far from our roots, far from our connections, we weaken our ability to fight for justice. People surrounded by people seeking for the greater good is the beginning, the middle, and the accomplishment of civil society. Therefore, how can we act by living in a place where there are groups of people varying from Catholics to Pentecostals, atheists, extroverts, and missionaries? By allowing us to have a different beliefs, a religious freedom can broaden the differences, but it also increases our best human rights. It sets us free to do things that are good, such as the freedom to disagree, to worship, to gather, to protest, freedom to reform poor laws, seeking for religiousness, and changing anything we disagree, the freedom to giving back to charity, praying, teaching our kids, going to church, the freedom to manifest our beliefs in public, the freedom to follow the voice of our hearts. But freedom without obligation can only go so far. When it's about our relationships with people who have religion or not, religion sets us free from our selfish wishes. Jesus Christ's gospel teaches me to be responsible towards God and myself. This obligation comes in many ways, and it has to do with freedom, just like the obligation to show respect, the obligation of being well educated, listening, learning, the obligation to show empathy, to provide our opponent with the benefit of the doubt, analyzing our own beliefs, supporting a friend who is persecuted due to religion, being honest, patient, finding the good in other religions, the obligation of loving others like you love yourself, the obligation of learning about tradition and history, and honoring the law. These responsibilities are the connection allowing choices to have positive impact. When two things work together, all parts of society benefit. The system of religious freedom provides us basic rules to deal with the differences in the work environment, allows us to relieve our suffering, neighbors, churches to help in providing support during disasters, feeding people, religious leaders can counsel youth, training, also treating addiction, and many other services. Responsibility, in truth, makes the liberty noble. The more broad the religious freedoms laws are, more religion will be able to do good work. Partnership between religion and society leads to more peace. The law professor at the University of Yale, Stephen Carter, explains only religion has the majesty, power, and sacred language to teach all of us, religious or secular, the genuine mutual appreciation in which a successful society should be based upon. To complete, let's go back to the landscape analogy I used. The Iguaçu River runs through the south of Brazil until it reaches a plateau. There, the biggest waterfall systems falls from the rocks to create one of the most impressive wonders in the world. People come from all over the world to admire its beauty, the unimaginable water volume running through single rivers separating to comprise thousands of inequitable waterfalls. We share the same substance as humans, but we flow through our own paths, always following God's direction. These falls converge in the borders of Brazil and Argentina. And the movie called The Mission was recorded years ago, based on a real life story, Jesuit priest group that lived in the Guarani indigenous community in the 18th century. After a tough beginning, both sides learned to love each other. When the Portuguese slave trade threatened this, the priestess resisted alongside the indigenous Guaranis. Even though the army won, the Catholic and indigenous communities sacrificed their own lives, placing human dignity over all. The same way, the noblest of a human enterprise involves sacrifice and the usage of our freedom to help people around us. Following our conscience within us will always lead towards a beloved community. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My blessing to my elders, to my youngest, and to my equals. I'd like to excuse myself to enter sacred soil of each one of you here today, because ancestrality taught us to excuse ourselves. When we're talking about our people from African religions and the education that's provided within our homes, we excuse ourselves. It is my honor to represent the African religions from Brasilia, having the voice to tell all of you, thank you. Building bridges, our own, when they came from Africa, they had bridges. We had to learn in the Brazilian territory to build bridges. We have never closed our doors not to build bridges. Our doors were closed by those who harmed us. And from then on, we learned to extend our hands and tell each one of you, brothers to me. I don't know anyone from a different belief that's not my brother or sister. Many of you believe in God, Allah, Yeshua, and for me it's Shallah, Lenba. We change the meaning of the word, but not the faith. I did not write any texts because, thank God, today, the God from Mayori, my dad is Azi, they bring us that by the thought of each one of you who wants to build a bridge, we have answers to all of you by being here. All the houses, the religious houses in Brazil have never been closed to anyone. And we have always been stoned. Fingers were pointed at us because we're black, because we're monkeys. Those who lived in the Brazilian territory carries in their blood a bit of our ancestrality. And we learned to respect and to like. You have no idea of the invites I have been receiving to be able to say thank you very much for stepping on sacred soil of each of you who gives me attention, who listens to us saying that thank God or thank Oshala, we have water, water that feeds the planet. We have the soil that's sacred, especially in the month of August. There's air, there are leaves. So I leave you something to reflect upon. Today, we're trying to build bridges. We're really trying to walk hand in hand, saying, stop religious intolerance. No one's better than the other. We are human beings. We are walking towards spiritual evolution. Each one of us in their own homes, in their own time. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank the invitation and being part of this panel. It is a great joy to share this table with you. This panel will arouse many times of reflections. I've been through many dimensions of the theme before choosing a focal point. I wanted to center some few contributions in 2 dimensions. The first one has to do with the relevance of the communitary life to society in general, and what the Baha'i community understands as community, a concept that will go much further than its members. The other has to do with which capacities or elements that are needed so that different communities can become protagonists of the process of social change, and what are the contributions of religions in this context. I'd like to clarify some assumptions that will foment this. First is that Baha'i is an independent worldly religion, and the life purpose of a person that wants to apply the learnings is to develop its potentialities and capacities, ethical and spiritual capacities, and to give a contribution to transform reality. The Baha'i call this effort orienting the way people organize their personal and collective matters of double purpose. There is a intimate relationship of the collective process and individual progress. One cannot happen without the other. So the faith, whichever it is, implies an involvement in society's lives. The religious living should be a powerful instrument of changing character and social structure. Making those principles and religious beliefs concrete will provide transformation, especially among the relationships of individuals, institutions. And the other assumption has to do with the humanity. Every religion can affirm that. We all belong to one family, and the answers to the challenges we face are within ourselves in this common humanity. What does that mean? That the masses of humanity are also a huge reservoir of capacitation for the advance of humanization, not just in theory, but in cities and where people develop and live their lives. It is there that we can operate concrete and inclusive transformation. So when we think of strategies of social transformation, we are led to believe of communitary dynamic. The more problematic or diverse our family experience can be to our development, it is still a very small space for the full scope of potentiality of the human being development. At the same time, considering society as a whole might seem something very broad, especially in our current rhythm, growing in size and complexity. Society and humanity is too big for us to influence. So it's in the community life where we have to seek for answers, basic answers for the organization of the collective life. And the place where we can develop these potentialities and rebuild relationships and work for the reformulation of societies there. It is within the neighborhoods, the locations where populations can learn together about creating environments that promote a bigger participation of all people. and then re-examine the role of the individual, the community, and the institutions. Communities are irreplaceable for social organization, and they're needed to keep the structure and the cohesion of society. So for all these issues, Baha'i has been seeking to learn on how to transform society in a work that is based on community work. And this is not regarding just one community, but those reflections, they will inspire in the Baha'i experience to promote that to a bigger number of people, to transform reality. This won't be stopped in a certain community. We are trying to unleash the power of society building that religions can provide. And I want to include this I want to include that people from different origins and different geographical areas can participate. And this is not just a religious diversity, but this is a movement that promotes the participation of a big number of people that share beliefs, that wants to give a contribution to the transformation of society and can build a view of future, especially from the knowledges offered by religions. In other words, in a way that's very incipient, the Baha'i community is learning of the strength of communities, working consciously to create good patterns of collective life. And I would like to present some of the capacities and elements that we have seen emerging that are particular to the contribution of religions. One of these elements is regarding the promotion of environments that are promoting participation in society life for all people, removing their different obstacles that many times exist so that more diverse groups can do their contribution. If we want to build a society that is free, fair, and with solidarity, we have to assume that this change won't come from a certain group or governmental agencies. Changing this will imply of the involvement of all society. This is a shared task indeed. We have to have that in mind. All people have the right to participate in a more fair society, and also the responsibility of contributing to its construction. Regarding to that, the Baha'i experience is showing the need of exploring at least 3 concepts that can promote more participation. The first of these concepts has to do with what we call the principle of the consultation. This capacity of having a dialogue that is effective and participative. Religions have an important role when including and considering different perspectives and voices in the process of decision making. And I would like to reinforce religion's roles, because a dialogue of this nature has to do with attitudes that are regarding ethical and moral more than technical, or they're relevant. This consultation has some characteristics. It will be oriented for solution and not motivated by personal interests. It's based on consensus, and they don't want to get the mean point of different points. Different groups are encouraged to participate, so there's a sense of responsibility on the social being. And this is a constant effort of reading the reality around and contributing to the needs of the society. The second one has to do with power. Although everybody can be reunited on the same table, the distribution and the relationship of power do not allow an equal participation, especially on the decision-making processes. So there is a conscience that the relationship of power must be reconsidered over the notions of domination and oppression. And religions have a fundamental role with that. They can affirm from their knowledges and practices the dignity for all human beings. And this is a field in all conversations, how we can approach and go deeper on the unlimited powers of human spirit and its potentialities. We can have many answers here. And this will take to the last element connected to the participation that I wanted to share, which is the concept of justice, which is crucial for all religions. The transformation that we are referring is collective. The change is social, and it's a transformation process that will go beyond temporary solutions for problems that are that have their roots in society. This requires collective commitment, participation, and collaboration, and the means that justice is being sought must be coherent. So if the bigger participation is the end, the means cannot represent the transference of power from one group to the other. Some processes can ensure that. One of them is the learning in action. The motives of that is described as a number of individuals, communities, and actions can transform towards a society that is more cohesive and fair. Through this action, they can have clarity on the way that we are going. Strategies and approaches can be re-examined and tested. As mentioned before, those ideas will inspire on the experience of the Baha'i community when working for the improvement of society, especially through these last elements, talking about strategies and objectives and methods. The efforts of the community Baha'i, they acknowledge that the social change depends on the mobilization of knowledge that comes from region and from science. Because we comprehend that a free and fair and society is a society that is prosperous, material and spiritually. This might be another important element from religion. Its capacity of promoting coherence of the existence historically. And this is the speech of my colleagues. We have different examples of the advance of civilization has depended on requisites that are practical and scientific, but also in a set of values that we define as coming from spirituality. And that doesn't have to do with a specific knowledge or a specific religion, but of this legacy that is fruit of the diversity of religious expressions. On the Baha'i experience, it's clear that to have progress, we would have to have both systems that have propelled humanity throughout the centuries, science and religion. Religion has to be the science has to be systematic. Religion has to do with the convictions of people, and it can contribute to overcome discrimination, audacity. Religions are an important element of social life. So when restructuring society, they have a role. They offer the system and are educating humanity to have more complex level of association and collaboration. And in this context, the religious community should focus on how religion can be a way to propel and forest these attributes in all people, these noble attributes of all people. Having a work as a practical communities where all these knowledges are applied for the benefit of all. Many times the principles are just like a sort of inspiration and a moral north for all communities. So religions can be a source of knowledge, which implies that individuals can use the knowledge produced by them and can apply them to the society. And finishing with this element opens perspective so can approach religions beyond the notion of just rituals, tradition, and practices, or limited just to the individual and confine it to the private sphere. To advance in this direction, our religious groups, the scholars of religions, we want to identify the elements that unify us, the constructive power of them, and the perceptions of society as a whole that they can extract something. Thank you.
Dear, I'd like to greet all the authorities that comprise this table. I wish you the peace of God may be with you. The role of religious communities in building free, fair, and solidary communities very broad, demands historical perspective. At the same time, understanding of the current scenario we are experiencing. I'm sure we do not need to justify the role, the importance of role for all of us here, considering we represent institutions that are within this story, persevere in the purpose they were called to act upon as religion. As being connected in the timeline, the correlation between the divine and the human, between the chronos and kairos, material and spiritual. Our huge challenge is the fact that current society is turning off their own consciousness about their history, turning off their consciousness about themselves, humanity, and turning off their consciousness about God. To paraphrase Albert Bandura, a Canadian psychologist who talks about moral disengagement, I'd say that we are also experiencing religious disengagement or shut down in between I profess and I'll do. That's to say, when we say, oh, I believe, I pray, I meditate, this has nothing to do with my choices, my ideas, the way I act, politics, personal interest, economy, market. So we can clearly see a discompass, disengagement. By cutting off this line connecting us to the sacred, eternal, and supernatural, we are also cutting off the inherent values of faith contributed to social transformation. Therefore, religions have two challenges. The first, ensure fundamental right to religious freedom. The second, ensuring social equity. How can we collaborate to the sense of justice and the common good? That's why we needed to pay attention to this double demand, seeking the necessary means for dialogue in building a fairer, more solidary world in which religious freedom also ensures us commitment and engagement in building a feasible world for the next generations. Sustainable planet, an integral ecology that respects nature and all cultures and peoples around the world. According to the report that was provided by ACN, this fundamental human right of expressing and experiencing religious freedom has been disrespected and disregarded in different countries. The numbers are amazing, and the circumstances impress us considering how aggressive the acts against the religious freedom are. And on the other hand, we see a very reaction that is very complex when in the name of religion we allow hate to grow and co-opting religiously according aiming towards benefits that go against the world peace and common benefits. In many countries, religion is an instrument and is a hostage of other interests. So it's important for us to recollect and recover references that have already been given by those who came before us. The International Theological Commission on Religious Freedoms for the Well-being in a theological approach approved in 2019 by the Vatican. It states in number 5, alleged ideological neutrality of a political culture declaring that it's going to be developed by justice, procedural justice rules, rejecting any kind of ethical reasoning and religious inspiration, manifests the trend to prepare ideology of neutrality, which actually imposes marginalization, if not exclusion of religious expression in the public sphere. Therefore, total freedom in participation in composing democracy and a democratic citizenship. And here we can see double-sided ambivalence of the neutrality in the public sphere that is just for show. And civil rights that are objectively discriminatory. A civil culture that defines its own humanism through the removal of the religious component of human reality. We need to also put aside parts of its own history, like knowledge itself, tradition, and social cohesion. Number 7 tells us progressive subtraction in the postmodernity of commitment to truth puts in new terms the political and legal thematic of religious freedom. On the other side, the theories of the liberal state that is considered regardless of the contribution that argument and religious culture bring should conceive it as more vulnerable to pressures of a religious ways or pseudo religiosity that try to assert themselves in the public space outside the rules of cultural and respectful dialogue and outside a, a very citizen debate. Protection of religious freedom and social peace presupposes a state that not only develop reciprocal cooperation logics between civil society and religious associations, but also that shows itself to be able to implement appropriate culture to with religion. Religion should be stimulated constantly to develop the point of view of reality and the living that inspires in a language that can be understandable. Therefore, dearest, we can suggest that the topic proposed for the Brazilian Symposium is not only a topic, but a purpose to be conquered by recalling the learnings of the Declaration of the Second Vatican Council. Number 2, it states, we need anthropological fundaments. Humanity is facing an anthropological crisis and disengagement surrounding itself and its history. So we need to understand the religious freedom first at this individual dimension, not an individualistic dimension, individual dimension. Who is this human being? Then its communitary dimension, highlighting the value of religious communities. This is a very interesting expression. The intermediate corpus of social living. For us, the role of religious communities today is to ensure humanity with the fundamental right of religious freedom, but at the same time, engage, commit with the social fabric, commit in the social fabric with values of justice, solidarity, and peace in the search for the common good as the intermediate corpus connecting humanity with the divine, the useful, eternity. This journey is up to us. We cannot give that up. We should do this with excellence. Thank you. We would like to thank the panelists who bring very important contribution for the beginning of our discussions. Definitely the thematic of religious freedom can advance from this perspective of how religious communities can contribute to developing a free, fair, and solidary community. I would also like to highlight, as it is in the material you received, that the importance of human dignity has also been brought up. And this is a topic that goes through everything. The Declaration of Punta del Este on human dignity of people everywhere. Definitely, this is an element we can all agree on, even though there are differences in perspectives between religious and non religious groups. A belief is the freedom to have or not a changing religions. This freedom protects both religious communities, but also the groups that do not express any faith. But for this peaceful, fair, solidary coexistence, we need this agreement that we need to respect and ensure human dignity for all.